The polished silver cloche felt heavier than usual in her hand. Maya took a steadying breath, the scent of truffle oil and roasted garlic a familiar comfort in the controlled chaos of the dinner service. She moved between tables, a ghost in a black apron, her steps silent on the plush burgundy carpet of Il Sovrano. Her life was a quiet rhythm of taking orders, clearing plates, and fading into the background. It was a skill she had perfected. However, the man at table 12 made fading impossible. He had not looked at her, not once, yet she felt the weight of his stillness across the entire dining room. He sat at the head of a long table of men in dark, impeccably tailored suits, their voices a low murmur of gravel and smoke. But he was the center of gravity. His suit was a shade of charcoal, so dark it was almost black, the cut of it speaking a language of quiet, surgical expense. A heavy gold signet ring on his pinky finger caught the low light, the only piece of flash on him. His hands rested on the table, one on either side of a crystal water glass, perfectly still. They were brutal hands, she thought, elegant and scarred. Hands that could break things as easily as they could sign a check. She knew who he was. Everyone in this part of the city knew Dante Moretti. His name was a whisper, a warning, a prayer. He owned the building, the block, and likely the politicians who zoned it. He was a creature of myth, and he was sitting in her section. The doors to the restaurant opened, and a wave of cold night air swept in. An older woman, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane, was escorted to the table by one of the suited men. She was frail, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, her silver hair pinned in an elegant coil. She settled into the chair beside Dante, who rose to help her, his movements fluid and precise. He murmured something to her, his voice too low to carry, and she patted his cheek. Maya's manager, a man whose sweat betrayed his terror, gestured frantically. It was her job to greet the new arrival, to offer water, to take a drink order. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was just another guest. She told herself that over and over. Just an old woman. As she approached the table, her focus entirely on the matriarch. The woman looked tired, her dark eyes clouded with the weariness of age and a long journey. A wave of unexpected sympathy washed over Maya. She looked so much like her own grandmother, gone 5 years now. The same proud set of her jaw, the same deep-set eyes that had seen too much. Without thinking, without filtering the impulse through the part of her brain that screamed for caution, she leaned in slightly. She offered a small, respectful smile, and then she spoke. She did not say, "Good evening, madam. May I get you some water?" Instead, she greeted the old woman in a dialect so specific, so rooted in the sun-beaten hills of a single Sicilian province, that it had no place in this glittering New York dining room. It was the language of her grandmother's kitchen, a language of lullabies and whispered secrets, a private music she thought had died with its last speaker. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Every conversation at the table did not just stop. It shattered. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Glasses were held suspended in midair. The low murmur of the restaurant seemed to drop away, leaving only the sound of Maya's own breathing. The men in suits stared at her, their faces blank masks of shock, their eyes suddenly hard and watchful. The old woman's head snapped up. Her cloudy eyes cleared, focusing on Maya with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Her lips parted in a silent, astonished "oh." But it was Dante Moretti's reaction that stole the air from her lungs. He had been looking at his mother, a rare, soft light in his expression. At the sound of Maya's voice, that light did not just extinguish. It was annihilated. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and for the first time that night, his eyes met hers. They were the color of dark, aged whiskey, and they held no warmth at all. They were cold, analytical, and utterly lethal. In that single, silent glance, Maya understood that she had not just made a mistake. She had lit a fuse. She had walked into the lion's den and spoken the language of the pride, and now she would not be allowed to simply walk out. The shy waitress was gone. In her place was a target. Dante's voice was low, a controlled rumble that cut through the frozen silence. Where did you learn that? It was not a question. It was a demand for an asset, a piece of intelligence he had not accounted for. Maya's throat went dry. The manager was now a statue of pure panic near the kitchen doors. My grandmother, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She was from near Palermo. The old woman, his mother, spoke then. Her voice, though frail, was sharp, and she spoke in the same old, forgotten dialect. She asked Maya a question. A test. She asked for her family name. Maya gave it. It was a simple, common name, but here, in this room, it landed like a judgment. The matriarch's eyes widened further. She looked at her son, a storm of emotions crossing her face. Shock, recognition, and something that looked terrifyingly like fear. Dante's gaze did not leave Maya's face. The assessment in his eyes deepened. He saw not a waitress, but a variable, a loose thread in the tightly woven tapestry of his world. You will bring us a bottle of the Barolo, he said, his voice deceptively calm. And then you will wait for me in the manager's office until your shift is over. It was an order cloaked as a request, a cage whose bars were made of his quiet, absolute authority. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the cloche, turn, and flee into the night. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that his men would be on her before she reached the door. They moved like shadows, their purpose singular. So she nodded. A single, jerky movement. She turned and walked toward the wine cellar, the weight of a dozen predatory stares on her back. The rhythm of her life had been broken. She had stumbled into a world that operated on a different set of rules, a world of loyalty and blood, of debts that were never forgotten. And by speaking a few words of comfort to an old woman, she had just incurred one of her own. She did not know what it was yet, but she knew it would be paid. The manager's office was small and smelled of stale coffee and fear. Maya sat in a worn chair, her hands clenched in her lap, for 3 hours. She listened to the distant sounds of the restaurant winding down, the clatter of plates, the murmur of the last guests leaving. Each sound was a tick of the clock, counting down to a confrontation she could not avoid. When Dante Moretti finally entered, the small room seemed to shrink. He closed the door behind him, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot. He did not sit. He stood before her, a towering silhouette against the dim light, his presence filling every corner of the space. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was studying her, peeling back the layers of her cheap uniform and nervous exterior, searching for the threat he was certain was there. My mother is a private woman, he began, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in the small space. She does not appreciate surprises. I didn't mean to surprise her, Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. She reminded me of my grandmother. It was impulsive. In my world, impulse is a liability, he said, taking a step closer. The scent of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and something sharp like cedar reached her. It gets people hurt. Tell me about your grandmother. She hesitated. Her memories of her nana were sacred, a small, warm place in a life that had often been cold. She did not want to offer them up for inspection to this man, but the look in his eyes told her she had no choice. She came here after the war, from a small village called Sutera. She never spoke much about it. She taught me how to cook, how to make lace. And she taught me how she spoke. His expression did not change, but a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Sutera, he said the name as if it were a piece of a puzzle he was finally placing. My mother is from the same village. The connection clicked into place, a cold, sharp fact. It was not a comfort. It was a complication. I didn't know. No, he said, his tone flat. You would not. The people who leave, and the people who stay, they live in different worlds. He paused, his gaze intense. What was your grandmother's family name? She told him again. He went still, a predator catching a scent on the wind. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between them. He was so close now she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the faint, silver scar that cut through his left eyebrow. That name is not unknown to my family, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a dangerous confidence. There was a disagreement. A long time ago, before I was born. A matter of honor. A cold dread trickled down her spine. This was not about a shared hometown. This was about history. A history written in blood. I don't know anything about that. My grandmother never spoke of any disagreements. Perhaps she was wise, he said. But his eyes said he did not believe in her ignorance. He believed she was a message, a ghost sent from the past to haunt his table. A rival family, perhaps, digging up old grievances, using an innocent-looking girl as their weapon. It was a move he could respect for its subtlety, even as he prepared to dismantle it. Your shift is over, he said, abruptly changing the subject. You will come with me. I can't. I have to get home. He almost smiled. It was a cold, cruel curve of his lips that held no humor. You believe you have a choice in this matter? You spoke a language you should not know, from a village you should not have heard of, to a woman who is the center of my world. Your home is no longer safe for you tonight, because I am not the only one who heard you. My enemies have ears everywhere. He was not threatening her. He was stating a fact. He was telling her that her innocent, impulsive act of kindness had painted a target on her back. And the only person who could protect her was the man who was, himself, the greatest danger she had ever faced. He was offering her a cage, but he was calling it protection. And as he stepped aside, holding the door open for her, she knew she had no choice but to walk into it. Therefore, she rose from the chair, her legs trembling, and walked out of the small office and into his world. A world where a simple greeting could be a declaration of war. The car was a black sedan with windows so dark they reflected the city lights like pools of oil. One of Dante's men, a mountain with a face of stone, held the door for her. She slid onto the cold leather, the scent of the car a sterile counterpoint to Dante's sandalwood and cedar. He got in beside her, and the space, which should have felt large, became claustrophobic. They drove in silence through the glittering streets of Manhattan. Maya stared out the window, watching the familiar world slide by, feeling as if she were looking at it from behind a pane of thick glass. It was her city, but it no longer felt like her own. Dante did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, his profile carved from stone, his thoughts a locked room she had no key for. She thought about her apartment, a small walk-up in Queens with a temperamental radiator and a window box of herbs. It was her sanctuary. The thought of it being unsafe, of men like the ones at Dante's table knowing where she lived, made her feel sick. Where are we going? She finally asked, her voice small. Somewhere safe, he replied, without turning his head. Safe. The word sounded foreign coming from him. His idea of safety was likely very different from hers. Their destination was a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a place of stark, minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of the city, a kingdom laid out at his feet. The furniture was all clean lines and dark wood, the art on the walls abstract and expensive. There was nothing personal, nothing soft. It was less a home and more a fortress. You will stay here, he said, walking to a massive window. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the city he owned. My man, Marco, will be outside the door. No one will get to you. Get to me? The fear she had been holding at bay began to bubble up. Who would want to get to me? I'm a waitress. He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes was absolute. You are the woman who spoke the Sicilian dialect to my mother. To my rivals, the Falcone family, that makes you a person of interest. They will assume you are my messenger, or my weakness. The name Falcone landed like a stone in her gut. She had heard it whispered in the restaurant, linked to stories of violence and disappearances. But I'm not, she insisted, her voice rising with desperation. I told you. It was my grandmother. It does not matter what the truth is, he said, his voice cutting through her panic. It only matters what they believe. And they will believe the worst. They will want to know what you know. He was right. She knew he was right. Her innocence was irrelevant. In his world, perception was reality. She sank onto a sleek leather sofa, the material cold against her skin. She felt trapped, a pawn in a game whose rules she was only just beginning to understand. Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. He walked to a bar carved from a single piece of black marble and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He did not offer her one. He drank it in one slow, deliberate swallow. "My father died protecting my mother," he said, his back to her. The admission was so sudden, so personal, it felt like a crack in his armor. He was betrayed by someone he trusted. Someone from his own village. Since that day, I have trusted no one who comes from that place. I have kept her shielded from all of it.
His wound.
It was right there, a raw nerve he had just exposed. A betrayal that had shaped him, that had forged his coldness and his control. He saw her as a potential repetition of that history. A ghost of the ultimate betrayal. "Until you," he said, turning to face her. "You walked up to my table and reminded her of everything I have tried to make her forget. You brought the old world into my house." The accusation hung in the air between them. He was not just protecting her from the Falcons. He was containing her, isolating the threat she represented to the careful, cold order of his life. A spark of defiance flickered within her. She would not be his prisoner, a symbol of his past trauma. She stood up, meeting his gaze. "I am not your history, Mr. Moretti. I am not a ghost. I'm a person who made a mistake. Your mistake is now my problem," he said. "And I always solve my problems." Days bled into one another. Maya was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Marco, the silent guard, brought her food from the finest restaurants in the city. There were books, movies, a view that people paid millions for. But it was a cage all the same. Dante was a phantom presence. He came and went at odd hours, sometimes not appearing for a day or 2. When he was there, he rarely spoke to her. She would find him standing by the windows, a phone pressed to his ear, his conversations quiet and lethal. She learned a rhythm of his life from a distance. She learned that he slept little, that he drank whiskey at dawn, and that the only person who could make him soften his voice was his mother, Elena, when she called. One evening, he came back later than usual. There was a tension in his shoulders she had not seen before, and a dark bruise high on his cheekbone. He ignored her, heading straight for the bar. But his hand was unsteady as he poured his drink. A small, dark red stain was spreading across the cuff of his white shirt. He was hurt. The waitress in her, the caretaker, took over before the prisoner could object. She went to the bathroom and came back with a first aid kit she had found in a cabinet. She walked up to him, her heart pounding. "You're bleeding," she said softly. He looked down at his hand as if just noticing the blood seeping from a deep gash on his forearm, likely from a knife. "It is nothing." "Let me," she said, her voice firm. It was not a request. He stared at her for a long moment, his whiskey-colored eyes searching hers. She expected him to refuse, to push her away. Instead, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He sat on the sofa and held out his arm. She knelt before him, her touch gentle as she cleaned the wound. The cut was deep, clean, surgical. Her fingers brushed against his skin, and a current passed between them, sharp and unexpected. He did not flinch. He just watched her, his gaze so intense it felt like a brand. The silence in the room was different now. It was not empty. It was charged, filled with everything they were not saying. She worked carefully, stitching the wound with a butterfly closure from the kit. Her proximity to him was intoxicating and terrifying. She could smell the faint scent of gunpowder beneath his cologne, the metallic tang of his blood. This was his reality. Violence was not an intrusion. It was his element. When she finished, her hand lingered on his arm for a second too long. She looked up and found his eyes on her. The coldness was gone, replaced by something raw and unsettling. He saw her, she realized, not as a threat, not as a problem, as a woman. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rasp. She pulled her hand back as if burned and stood up. "You should have a doctor look at that." "You have a steady hand," he replied, ignoring her comment. He stood as well, and for a moment, They were just a man and a woman in a silent room, the city lights painting patterns on the floor. He lifted his hand, the one that was not injured, and his fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was featherlight, yet it sent a tremor through her entire body. It was a moment of unexpected tenderness, so small it was almost deniable. But it was there. A crack in the ice. That was the moment she made a choice. She could have continued to be his prisoner, to wait for him to decide. She was no longer a liability. But seeing him wounded, seeing that flicker of vulnerability, changed something. He was not just a monster. He was a man, carrying a weight she could not imagine.
"The Falcons," she said.
This was them, wasn't it? He did not answer, but his jaw tightened. That was answer enough. "You're trying to handle this quietly," she continued, her mind racing. "You don't want a war that brings attention to your mother. They know she's your weakness. And now they think I am, too." He watched her, his expression guarded once more. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you stop treating me like a porcelain doll you need to hide in a box," she said, her voice gaining strength. "If they're watching me, if they think I'm important to you, then use it. Use me." The words were out before she could stop them. It was a reckless, insane offer. She was offering to be bait. She was choosing to step deeper into his world, not because he was forcing her, but because for the first time, she saw a path where she was not just a victim. She could be a player. A long silence followed. Dante studied her, a new kind of assessment in his eyes. He was seeing her competence, her intelligence under pressure. He was seeing the steel beneath the shy waitress exterior. "You do not know what you are asking," he said finally. "I know that I'm tired of hiding," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I will not be someone's liability." He saw that she meant it. Her choice had a direct and immediate consequence. The ground between them shifted. She was no longer just the woman he had to protect. She was an asset. A dangerous, unpredictable one. Therefore, the nature of their arrangement had to change. He was no longer her jailer. He was now her accomplice. And that was infinitely more dangerous. The plan was simple and terrifying. Dante would let it be known, through carefully chosen channels, that he would be dining with Maya at a small, exclusive restaurant in Tribeca. A place with back exits, clear sight lines, and men loyal to him on every corner and in the kitchen. It was a stage, and she was the main performance. The Falcons would see it as an act of arrogance, a flaunting of his new prize. They would not be able to resist making a move. The night of the dinner, Maya's hands trembled as she fastened a simple black dress. Dante had bought it for her along with a pair of delicate diamond earrings. They felt like shackles. He stood by the door of her bedroom, watching her. He was dressed in a dark suit, his presence commanding. "Are you certain about this?" he asked. His voice was flat, but she heard the undercurrent of something else. Concern. "Yes," she said, turning to face him. She had crossed a line she could not uncross. This was her choice. The restaurant was beautiful, all dark wood and candlelight. The tension was a third person at their table. Maya could feel the eyes on them, the unseen observers. She tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. Dante was a study in calm. He spoke to her quietly, asking about her life before him, about the grandmother who had inadvertently started all of this. He was gathering information, but it felt like more than that. It felt like he was trying to see her, to understand the woman who had made such a reckless choice. The signal came midway through their main course. A subtle hand gesture from a man at the bar. Dante's eyes met hers. "It is time." They left through a side door leading to a private garden. The air was cold, the scent of damp earth and city rain filling her lungs. Two men stepped out of the shadows. Falcon's men. They were not large or imposing, but their eyes were empty, their movements efficient. Everything happened in a blur. Dante pushed her behind him, his body a solid shield. He moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. It was not a brawl. It was a brutal piece of choreography. There was the sickening crack of bone, a choked cry. One man went down. The other pulled a knife, lunging. Dante sidestepped, his hand clamping around the man's wrist. He twisted. The knife clattered to the stone path. It was over in seconds. 2 bodies lay on the ground, groaning. Dante stood over them, his chest rising and falling, but his hands were steady. He was not even breathing hard. He had done this 1,000 times. His men appeared from the shadows, dragging the 2 men away. The garden was silent again, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Maya had seen him. Not the businessman, not the quiet, brooding presence in the penthouse. She had seen the predator, the lethal force that kept his world in order. And it did not just frighten her. It fascinated her. He turned to her, his eyes dark in the moonlight. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, her throat tight. He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You were brave." That was when the confession came. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous, more honest. "I should not have let you do this," he said, his voice rough. "Putting you in the center of this, it was a risk I had no right to take." "It was my choice," she whispered. "It does not matter," he said, his gaze burning into hers. "You are under my protection. That is absolute. I failed in that tonight." He was not apologizing. He was stating a breach of his own code. And, in his world, that was the most profound admission he could make. It was a confession of what she had become to him. Not a liability, not an asset. Something more. Something he felt responsible for on a level that had nothing to do with strategy. The moment was broken by the sound of a phone vibrating. One of his men approached, handing him the device. Dante listened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He hung up, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. The small victory they had just won turned to dust. "That was Marco," he said, his voice tight with a terrible calm. "From the penthouse. The man we just caught, he was not working alone. He had a partner." A cold dread washed over her. "A partner?" "He was a diversion," Dante said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The cost of their gamble had just come due, and it was a price she had never anticipated. "While we were here, playing games with the Falcons, someone went to your apartment in Queens. They were not looking for you." He paused, and the weight of his words crushed the air from her lungs. "They were looking for anything that could tell them more about your grandmother."